Luke Skywalker's first great failure as a Jedi Master. Greetings, and welcome back to the archives. The term Students of the Force takes on a new importance in today's video. In the year 10 ABY, Luke Skywalker began to collect perspectives for his Jedi Academy on the world of Yavin 4. He went on a long quest to find people of all sorts from all across the galaxy that showed an aptitude to the Force. But Luke carried with him a great fear. A fear that if he was incorrectly teaching one of his students, that he could cause them to fall to the dark side. The failure of Obi-Wan Kenobi resulting in Lord Vader lingered in the back of his mind, for it was now Luke's turn to take the jump. Ultimately, this would indeed occur within mere months of Luke Skywalker opening his Jedi Academy. So in today's video, we will talk about the name of the Jedi Gantorus, Luke's first great failure as a teacher. Being new to the whole teaching like a Jedi thing, Luke made several oversights in the very beginning. One of those being that he was accepting literally just about anyone into his academy that was Force sensitive. Luke had made the decision to exclusively not seek out children. He wanted to be able to train grown people who could take care of themselves. Partially because he didn't want to run a daycare right off the bat, but mostly because he wanted to jumpstart the Academy's production of fully grown Jedi to be immediately put to use in the wider galaxy. To this end, Luke Skywalker's first batch of students were largely adults, with some being middle-aged or even older than Luke. But age was not the oversight, rather the quality of people he was bringing in was. And the first Jedi to show a major red flag is the subject of today's holocron, a former Jedi by the name of Gantoris. Gantorus was a human described as being tall and muscular, with no eyebrows and long black hair tangled into a thick braid. Gantorus was born into an isolated colony on the hostile world known as Eel Shah. The colony descended from ship crash survivors from long ago, and they lived a very rough and a primitive life, foraging on bug-like creatures and limited vegetation on the world, while living in a village constructed from scrap. The planet was rocky, volcanic, full of geysers, and frequent weather disasters. Gantorus grew up knowing that he had a strange ability because he could foresee when the weather occurrences would happen, and he could warn his village, saving them from volcanic eruptions, earthquakes, and avalanches. Because of his instinctive clairvoyance and his natural strength, he ascended to becoming the leader of the colony. Rumors of this man's strange ability reached the ears of Luke, who had been purposefully searching for people like him. Anyone who had a strange thing happen around them, or constant strokes of luck. At this point in the timeline, Luke did not know about midichlorians, so this was his only method of finding prospective Jedi, locating those deemed as unexplainably strange or unusual. When Luke arrived on the Wookiee world in his classic black jumpsuit from Endor, he stumbled across Gantorus in his village, attempting to dig out children who had been trapped under a rock slide. Luke announced his presence by using his telekinetic abilities to carefully move all of the rocks and rescue at least one of the children. The other had already been dead before the Jedi had arrived, however, and despite the Jedi having rescued one of the children, Gantorus was mistrustful and rather confrontational with the Grand Master. Gantorus revealed that he knew who Luke was, knew that he was coming for him for his special abilities, and stating that he once had a dream of a dark man, someone offering him powerful knowledge that would ultimately destroy him. Be sure to keep an eye on that detail moving forward in our story. Luke was shocked, but decided to submit himself to Gantorus' testing so that he could earn the man's trust. Over the next days, Gantorus would put Luke through deadly tests. He would bring him to a geyser under the pretense of foraging for grub worms down on the inside, but Gantorus knew that the geyser would erupt, and he escaped, leaving Luke behind. Because of Luke's abilities though, he was able to barely sense and escape the eruption of boiling water that would have steamed him alive. While at first he was angry with Gantorus' treachery, Luke decided to forgive, knowing that he had to prove to the man that he was not dangerous. This was obviously another red flag. The second and the final test of Gantorus was what he requested Luke to do inside of an active volcano. He and his village took Luke into the underground magma chamber and commanded him to cross the lava. There were floating rocks in the lava from one end to the other, creating a path for him to walk on successfully. Once again, Luke conceded to the request and began to walk along this hot path. But again, Gantorus betrayed him, as there was a giant serpent living in the magma. Its scales were naturally resistant to the heat, which meant that Luke's lightsaber was nearly useless against it. During his fight with the serpent, Luke used just enough force with his lightsaber to chip off one of the scales, and when the serpent delved back beneath the lava, the hot liquid penetrated and seared the creature from the inside, violently slaying the worm. But the skirmish had come at the cost of the rest of the rock path across the way. Luke saw that he could not complete the challenges Gantorus had put before him, But probably out of spite and power, Luke decided to pull away from his inhibitions and to try anyway. Then, as Gantorus and his village watched in awe, Luke took one step and then another, coating his feet with a veil of the Force. Focused and methodical, Luke walked across the lava lake, having entered a trance-like state of concentration. On the other side, Gantorus admitted to Luke passing his challenges, and agreed that he would go with him on one condition: that his people could come as well. Luke had arranged for the colony to be moved off of the violent world to a mild, grassy Dantooine. There was plenty to eat, and no weather occurrences that were freak. Compared to the world, it was a paradise. Comforted by this, Gantorus became eager to learn the ways of the Force, to learn the power of Luke Skywalker. Later on Yavin 4, Gantorus continued to progress in his Jedi training, becoming the very best of the current pool of the Jedi initiates. But soon, a voice came to Gantorus in his nightmares. The voice that he had anticipated was a dark man, the dark shadow which followed him around the Great Temple. The voice never left him, and as time went on, the voice to Gantorus would begin to speak to him while he was awake. The voice told him that there were gaps in Luke Skywalker's knowledge, that there were powers that Luke Skywalker knew, but that he was unwilling to share. The voice promised Gantorus power and knowledge that would make him a successful Jedi. This prospect greatly enticed Gantorus, who wanted to become the best Jedi he could, and accepted the knowledge from this dark man. He was given many pieces of forbidden knowledge, such as how to cast an aura of dread around himself to keep away unwanted creatures. Gantorus was also taught how to refresh himself by drawing upon the life force of smaller creatures to feed his own energy. Because of this, he no longer required sleep at all. But in one of the previous nightmares, the voice taught him in detail how to construct a lightsaber. This voice was the spirit of an ancient Sith Lord, a Sith Lord that frequent visitors of the archives will know quite well, Exar Kun, still trapped in the walls of his temple of Yavin 4, trapped after his ritual had gone wrong so many thousands of years prior. But now, he would take revenge on the Jedi. With fresh Force sensitives on his world, he poised for striking. This began when Gantorus and another student had explored an overgrown temple on Yavin 4. The temple was all black, as if made from obsidian. In truth, this had been the private retreat of Exar Kun when he had needed to be alone to hone his power in the Sith. Within this temple, Gantorus had found 3 gems that had been taken from the very core of the gas giant of Yavin. With the knowledge given to him by the spirit of Exar, Gantorus went into the abandoned parts of the temple that the Rebel Alliance had once used during the war. They had left behind their machinery, computers, landing grid panels, and automated defense systems. It was there where he found all the parts he needed to make a lightsaber, following the blueprints seared into his mind by his nightmares. At long last, he created his weapon. The hilt was black from the used technology, and the special multicolored gems from Yavin's core gave the blade an amethyst purple hue, with wisps of rainbow color occasionally ripping up and down the blade. As you know, most lightsabers only need 1 crystal in order to function, but with the extra gems, Exar Kun had taught Gantorus to employ a dual phase function in his lightsaber. This dual phase setting allowed a user to change the length of their blade at will during combat as a tactic used to surprise one's enemy. Exar Kun had pioneered this technology, and it was also used by Lord Vader later on. Proud of this creation, Gantorus waved his lightsaber around while saying, "Master Skywalker will see I am now a true Jedi." The next morning, Gantorus was late to join Luke Skywalker's lesson, but when he arrived, he shocked everyone by brandishing a lightsaber and challenging Luke to a duel. The Grand Master was stunned to see his students holding a lightsaber. He had not taught any of them how to create one yet. And then, with great pause, he asked his student where he got it. In response, Gantorus simply said, "Isn't it the test of a Jedi to build his own lightsaber?" Luke attempted to explain that while a lightsaber may seem like a simple weapon, it was difficult to master. An untrained user could hurt themselves or others. However, Gantorus was adamant, and he decided to taunt Luke by telling him that if he did not duel him, then Gantorus would just cut him down where he stood. He smirked and said, "That would be rather embarrassing fate for a Jedi Master of your caliber, wouldn't it?" Luke now knew that his words were useless, and he reluctantly took off his cloak and ignited his green lightsaber. Gantorus pressed the attack, whacking at Luke with his lightsaber as if it were a club. Wild, aggressive, unrefined, lacking of all finesse. However, he attacked Luke with such a violence and savagery that, unnerved, Luke was just defending himself, attempting to hold back and not hurt Gantorus. While attacking, Gantorus asked, "Am I a Jedi now?" With his back pressed against the Force edge, Luke decided that enough was enough, and explained that while the lightsaber was a Jedi weapon, a real Jedi should rarely use it, but that when a Jedi does, he must strike quickly and decisively. With a single blow downward chop, Luke stopped all of Gantorus' momentum and put him on the defense. The student clumsily defended himself as Luke advanced with finesse and grace, making each strike meaningful, displaying his true, unparalleled mastery. He did so without the intention to hurt his student, but to make him realize the challenges of a master, and how foolish he was to attempt to stop the Grand Master in a duel while being completely untrained. After Luke thought he had proven this point, he stopped with the attack altogether, ready to call the duel entirely. However, Gantorus revealed the hidden function of his lightsaber here, activating the dual phase ignition pulse. His blade nearly doubled in size, spearing right towards Luke. The master only barely dodged the surprise attack, causing his sleeve to become scorched. The astonished Luke would only stare in disbelief as his student used a function of Vader's lightsaber. Just like in his duel on the Death Star, Luke leaped upwards to the high ground, taking the limb of a tree where he demanded to know where Gantorus had learned this. Gantorus told him that he wasn't the only teacher of the Jedi way, and it was that he drove his lightsaber straight through the trunk of the tree, causing it to collapse. As Luke easily landed on the ground, he sensed Gantorus' anger, as he saw his new student was dangerously close to the dark side. He attempted to project an aura of calm over his student, but this failed entirely. Gantorus shortened his lightsaber and attacked again. Luke reaches out with his senses to the jungle around him for an opportunity to end the fight quickly, and Luke finds it. He then pretends to stumble over a fungus in order to lure Gantorus into committing a full-on attack. And when this happened, Luke slashes at the nearby leaves in order to startle a wild animal which runs out between the two Jedi. This distracted Gantorus long enough that Luke simply used the Force and ripped the lightsaber out of his grasp. With the duel over, Luke decided to save Gantorus' reputation in front of the other students, telling him that this was a very good exercise, but that he needed to control his anger and his will. He then gave Gantorus back his lightsaber once he felt that his student had come back to his senses. Luke had intended to speak with the man later in private and to get to the bottom of all of this, but unfortunately, this would never happen. Later that night, Gantorus was in bed, holding his lightsaber, feeling guilty at having attacked the Grand Master. He contemplated how he could use the weapon to destroy the specter that had taught him this forbidden knowledge, and that is when Exar Kun appeared as a shadow, bleeding out of the walls. The two had a short conversation where Gantorus demanded to know what he really was, what he wanted. The Sith said that he wanted Gantorus' anger to open the doorways of power to bring him back from the dead. Gantorus, though, valiantly announced that he would never have his anger, and began to quote the Jedi code taught to him by Luke. There is no emotion, there is peace. At this point, the spirit of Exar Kun got angry, telling him not to quote platitudes to him. Gantorus continues to repeat the code, and at that, the Dark Man laughed, deciding to show Gantorus what was really happening across the galaxy. One of the remaining warlords of the Empire, Admiral Natassi Dalla, had launched an attack on Dantooine. She used AT-ATs to slaughter the defenseless, the primitive people that Gantorus had loved, and that Luke had promised to defend. Horrified and distraught, Gantorus shouted that this was a lie, a trick. But Exar Kun simply said that he had no need to lie if the truth was so devastating. As Gantorus shouted no over and over, Exar continued to goad him into anger, breaking down his will until Gantorus ignited his lightsaber and lunged at the spirit. Later that night, Luke Skywalker awoke from a series of nightmares. As he roamed the halls of his temple restlessly, one of his students uncharacteristically comes to him in panic. Luke followed him to Gantorus' room, where all the other students had gathered. What he sees inside causes him to clutch the inside of the door as his knees give out beneath him. On the floor of what was left of Gantorus, a body, crisp, blackened from having been burned from the inside out. His skin was flaked and black, peeling ashes over his powdery bones. His clothes were still smoky by the time they found him. In the end, Gantorus' vision of a dark man offering him knowledge that ultimately destroyed him was true. The reality of his nightmares, foretold, brought to fruition. And this is what Luke considered his greatest failure as a Jedi Master. While this was most certainly not Luke's fault, there was a hidden enemy pulling the strings in the background. Luke would blame himself for not being more proactive with Gantorus, just as Obi-Wan had not been proactive with Anakin. Luke, just like Obi-Wan, waited in order to spare his student momentary pain. Gantorus had the potential to become a powerful Jedi. Right at the very end, he didn't fall to the dark side, but instead did his best to stay rooted in the Jedi way. We said earlier that he had many red flags, but he did stand as firmly as he could, and all he wanted to be was a great Jedi, just like someone else. It's a shame and a tragedy that he was preyed on, manipulated by Exar Kun in the very early days of his training. But it's likely that he would have fallen to the dark side regardless once he eventually found out about the slaughter of his people, which unfortunately was true. But with that, my friends, what are your thoughts on this story? What are your thoughts on one of Luke Skywalker's greatest failures as Grand Master, and how his greatest fear ultimately came to pass, but Luke Skywalker decided to become a better teacher because of it, not to give up, just as Obi-Wan had refused to give up? But with that, thank you for visiting the archives today, my friends, and may the Force be with you.